Meeting of the City Commission, Bowling Green, Kentucky, November the 1st, 2011. Work session, please come to order. Mr. City Manager.
Some time ago, the Planning Commission came forward with some changes to the zoning ordinance as it relates to signage and billboards. One of the elements of that process was the need for us as a community to look at how billboards will be placed around the community. There was a committee that is working on that process that hasn't completed its efforts, and they're asking you today to allow it to do that and to also put a moratorium so there's no rush to change at the last minute. Steve Hunter's here. I think he put together a short synopsis of the issue, and I think there's also members of the committee who are here. Mr. Bond, I believe, is here. If you have any questions from him or from Steve.
See if I got this. Zeros work with this side to side. All right. Steve Hunter, City County Planning Commission. Kevin just sort of framed that pretty well.
Thanks.
Going to walk through just a few quick slides. You guys have the same PowerPoint at your seat, but basically I want to talk about that first committee real quick that was established that spent several months getting the big changes in place that you guys passed in the summer. If you remember, when that committee was looking at LED signs, we started to drift into billboard signs, and we got into billboard spacing, and there was a provision that ended up being adopted that was new that went from 500-foot billboard spacing to 2,500. At some point, and I guess I'm drawing a blank here, at some point there was some discussion about a cap at the first committee, but a discussion of could a cap be put into place to work in conjunction with the spacing, and then that's where that second committee came into play. Still some discussion. We'll go explore a cap option to work in conjunction with the spacing, and then there was a smaller committee of 4 folks that has been meeting since summer, which is Robbie Bond, Tad Donnelly, Dennis Smith, and Tim Houston. Tim Houston representing Planning Commission, Dennis Smith, an engineer, and then Robbie Bond and Tad Donnelly being 2 of the billboard companies that operate in the community today. So those 4 folks, along with the staff, myself, Marshall Robinson, Rachel Hetzler, the planners, we've been meeting with these guys monthly, every couple weeks, trying to figure out how to come up with a cap. The problem is there's a lot of different options, a lot of different language, and honestly the committee has kind of been split on what to do until just recently they decided they think they got the right idea of a cap, and I'll explain that in a second, but what they needed is more time, like Kevin mentioned. So the motion, the formal motion they gave us last month was for me to ask the city to consider a moratorium for 12 months to allow this committee to establish additional language for a cap, but to expand the committee also. That the 4-member committee may need to be expanded a little larger to get a more cross-section of the business community. And then the cap be some kind of floating cap based on population, not an absolute. So with that, I'll just walk you through a few slides of this PowerPoint, and then again, if you have any questions at any time, just jump in here. Wanted to make sure you had all the billboard language that's in the current zoning ordinance. Won't go through all of this, but I think you know there's 2 kinds of billboards, interstate and urban. They're different kind of billboards. Interstates on the Parkway and I-65, urban are on these streets in the community here. 31W, 231, 6880, 880, 185. That's where urban billboards are. Also want to point out, in case you didn't know, interstate billboards can be as big as 1,600 square feet, where a traditional sign you see around town is 150 square feet per side, and a billboard, an urban billboard, can be as big as 600 square feet. Flipping the page real quick, and I'll point out what changed. We have heights. 60 foot for interstate, 40 foot for urban, how wide they can be, 40 foot for interstate, 50 foot for urban, how the signs are configured, and here's the spacing requirement that changed in the summer. Basically pretty straightforward. Replaced 500 feet and went to 2,500 foot spacing. And just to refresh your memory, the committee that had worked up to that point had estimated that with 500 foot spacing, we could have had potentially 560 billboards. Currently, there's 68 in the city, current, and about 30 some interstate. So there could be 560, and with the 2,500 foot spacing, it dropped the number around 140-ish. Again, there's some other factors you have to take into consideration in establishing a billboard And so it's not possible that maybe all of those would be eligible, but there's possible there could be 140. So that's 75 more than we have currently. Illumination, there was one change. If you remember this last sentence about electronic message displays, LEDs are prohibited on billboards. That went into effect in the summer. The rest of this sentence basically stayed the same. And then billboard lots, as you know, are required. You have to actually create a lot. You can have lease areas and other easements, but you have to physically create a 5,000 square foot lot zoned highway business or light industrial. That's the first step. You have to file a plat. And the billboard then is the principal structure on the lot. Years ago, I think this was the deterrent that someone prior to me put into place. This has been in our ordinance a long time. And if you talk to the billboard companies, they'll tell you that that's a big deal. And if you look around the country, not a lot of folks require this billboard lot requirement. We also used to make sure you had to have water and sewer, but that changed several years ago. We didn't think that was necessary to actually make them physically have water and sewer. But it used to be you had to create the lot, meet all the requirements, setbacks with, and you had to have water and sewer to create a billboard lot. Again, that was meant to be a deterrent to some level, but the billboard companies worked with that. They'd create their lots, then they'd get their building permits. Obviously, we still were getting new billboards, and the 2,500 foot spacing was kind of, in a sense, another way to try to kind of slow down the pace of some of the billboards. And then the cutouts, I won't get into that. That's just another technical provision related to billboard lots. This map, you have a small version in your hand. These are the interstate billboards that have been inventoried. You see the billboard corridor in gray. That is laid out by federal standards. Billboards, interstate billboards are only allowed within what's called the urbanized area. So in this area is where interstate billboards can be. But here's the inventory of them. A lot of them are old. Most of them are real old. If you go out there, you can tell they've just kind of been refreshed, re-maintenanced, whatever. But new interstate billboards could only go in these corridors that you see right here. Lover's Lane is an area where we don't allow billboards or Cemetery Road. So that's why there's this gap in the urbanized area. There could never be billboards in this location. But potentially the interstate billboards could be in these general areas. Those aren't really our focus today, the interstate, but you can see there's 33 currently to the county. There's even one up here at the county line, and just 2 on the parkway all the way to the county line. This is the map that tells you a little bit more. These are the urban billboards and all those corridors that I just mentioned in gray. And you can see we have 68, but there's been 5 building permits issued for billboards since August, about the time we put the 2,500 foot spacing into play. And those, there's one on Louisville Road, you see in this location, one on Russellville Road, one that's going to go next to Hardee's on Campbell Lane, one that's on Campbell Lane towards Scottsville Road. I'm sorry, this is the one that's going, this is on Campbell Lane next to Goodwill, right by Bowling Green Junior High, and this is the one that's on Scottsville Road, close to Campbell Lane. And I got pictures of all those I'll show you here in color. But what that does, that's 5 more billboards that have come into play while the committee's been working. So we've gone from 63 to 68 just in the last 60 or 90 days. And there was 2 permits issued on Monday, and another plat came in today. This is the Louisville Road location of the billboard permits already been issued. This is the frontage road. The Humane Society is down here. You see another billboard in here. This got in before the spacing issue, so it's going to meet the 500 foot spacing, not the 2,500. The billboard is going to be in this general location that you see as you're coming up and down Louisville Road. This is the Hardee's location. There's been a lot created kind of back in this area behind Hardee's, a 5,000 square foot lot, and that billboard will be somewhere, as we're sitting at the intersection, will be somewhere as we go up the bridge in this general location. That permit's been filed, approved, that plat's been approved. They just have not put the structure up yet. This is the billboard that's now on Russellville Road. This is, if you go out there, you guys probably saw this one. This is next to the car wash. This one met the 500 foot spacing. That permit was issued, was applied for just before the 2,500 foot spacing went into effect. So this one actually meets a 500 foot spacing, and it's on Russellville Road. This is the one next to the junior high. Here's the Bowling Green Junior High. This is Campbell Lane. This is the Goodwill store. And there's been a lot created in this general location. It has an easement that it deals with access. So the lot actually does this, and the billboard will be somewhere right in here, in this kind of grassy area over here. There'll be a billboard in this location. That permit's been issued, and that plat came in this week. This is the one that just went up on Campbell Lane. Some of y'all may have seen this one, little odd-shaped pole here. When it went up, folks weren't sure what was happening, if it was a traffic signal going up or a mast arm. A lot of calls and questions. But now that it's up, you can clearly tell it's a billboard. Speedway, Wits, the billboard lot was created in this general area. This will be a tri-vision, the ones that spin. Those type of messages will be on both of these panels there on Campbell Lane. So those are the 5 billboards that have come in since August. And again, the committee that I feel I'm working for at this point has asked that you all consider a moratorium for 12 months to give them some time to come up with a cap. And again, Mr. Bond's here representing the committee. He's obviously in this industry and knows all the technology and some of the trends better than I do. But the cap that we're investigating at this point would not be an absolute cap. It wouldn't be like we say there's 68 and never another billboard. There'd be some growth room initially, and the cap, what the committee desires, is to be based on some kind of population. So either we'd use census numbers or census population estimates from the Kentucky Data Center, something of that nature, where we establish a cap and the cap grows incrementally as population grows. That's what the committee wants us to design and build. Unfortunately, there's really not legislation like that anywhere in the United States that we can find, except maybe 1 or 2 examples. So we're going to write our own legislation, and I think it'll be pretty easy. I think we know where it'll go in the ordinance, and we can make it pretty simple, but we need time to get that done. And then, of course, like Mr. DeFebo just mentioned, we also don't want to create nonconformities. If we wait 6 months, get this legislation passed, get it through all the governments, you know, what if we get another 5 or 10 billboards then that don't meet the requirement? And again, I'm not saying we're going to have 140 billboards, but the potential's there with the 2,500-foot spacing to go from 68 to some number, and clearly it's gone up, you know, 8% in the last 60, 90 days. So with that, I'm glad to answer any question. I know Robbie may have a comment he'd like to add in here, and I think he's got some other photos if y'all want them.
Do you have a backlog right now, people waiting to?
I think we've cycled them through with the ones that I mentioned. All the permits that I'm aware of as of Monday, if they're in process, if this potentially was to pass, I think everything that's in process would go through. Anything that would happen after the moratorium obviously would be on hold while we build the legislation.
Okay. Any questions, Mr. Hunter?
I want to clarify the moratorium's not to exceed 12 months.
Not to
Hopefully,
exceed.
maybe they'll be in here hopefully sooner than 12 months. Or
Yeah, you know, if we can expand the committee and build this legislation, let's say in 30 days. Our challenge is we got to take it to the Planning Commission, take it to those other governments, like with comprehensive plan. That, you know, it'll take us 4 months right there to try to get everyone to get this adopted. That's more of our challenge than probably building the legislation. Although we've spent a few months now just trying to get to this point in the legislation, because we've been wrestling with what kind of cap, what's the parameter, population-based, traffic-based, some other type of cap, and we've decided what we want, but it's just going to take us a while to write it. So I think Gene's right. We could have it done by summer, possibly.
Any other? So Robbie,
Yeah, probably.
come on up, Robbie.
I'm Robbie Bond. I'm with Southeastern Displays, a predominant billboard advertising company in town. And I'd like to comment first of all on the staff here, the Planning Commission and so on. They've been very, very forthright and very, I think, very competent in trying to handle this situation. I brought some sets of pictures for you all. This is of a town here in Kentucky, a couple of local, or a couple of areas in the town very close to us and not even quite our size. Generally, a billboard operator and City and County Planning Commission are generally at, and to say the least, an antagonistic relationship. We've been fortunate here for some time now to be able to get along and try to do the best thing for our community. My actions as a billboard operator have been to try to grow with our community. As you can tell from these pictures, sometimes in our industry we can be our own worst enemy. If you get 3 or 4, the pictures you're seeing there of a couple areas in Somerset, Kentucky. They've got 4 or 5 different operators. They are building signs as fast, it's fast and furious. As fast as you can get something approved, they go for it. We have not done that, and we've not done it for a number of reasons. First of all, we would like to see the number of boards correspond with the growth, to have a decent market and not have one completely cluttered, even with our kind of advertising. Some folks, particularly in the planning and zoning community, do not care for us at all. I understand that. But I think there's a time and a place for everything. Not for everything, but for most everything. And if you can see a Wendy's or a McDonald's or something of that nature, I see no harm in seeing a billboard. But there does need to be some control of it, even though it is a speech, an avenue of commercial free speech and so forth. Billboards need to be controlled, and that picture there will tell you exactly why without having to say too often many words. What's been happening to date is we've got a good, viable, growing community here, thanks to you and many others. That attracts this type of development and growth, which is only natural. What we do have to be careful of is not to allow it to be out of control, to where if you didn't do anything as of right now, we could have potentially double the number of billboards in Bowling Green that there are now. You as city commissioners, I think, need to decide whether that's what you want or not, number one. Number two, if you don't want that, passing this moratorium to where logical folks with an interest in this community, not just coming in here to develop something, can sit and try to resolve these issues in a most fair way. And I think that's what you can do with this moratorium tonight. I feel it's kind of odd to be asking for more control on my own industry, but looking at those pictures, you can tell it's needed. I'll leave everything, unless you have particular questions of me. I think it's quite obvious what I think ought to be done, but I mean, it's in your court, and hopefully we can get this worked out if we have enough time. If you have any questions,
Do you feel you have enough time, Robbie, as far as first of the year or whatever time it takes, really?
Right. With the moratorium, and I understand it's proposed at 12 months, I think that we ought to be able to get it done in that time, I would think, and whatever modifications do need to be done. We've studied quite a bit on them so far. We just haven't been able to, kind of finish it up and make sure it's something that we think you all can live with, plus the community can live with. So that's kind of the way we're looking at it, or way I am.
Any other questions of Robbie? We have it on the agenda for
Yes.
tonight.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Robbie.
Thank you.
Item number B.
Mr. Mayor, As the Commission knows, every year it's been our practice and policy to improve the sidewalks in our community by either rehabilitating them significantly or to build new ones. We have a limited amount of money to do that. We're here tonight with staff's recommendation about what 5 projects that we have in the budget we believe have the highest priority. We wanted to get your support for that, and then Jeff and Karen and others are going to work with the neighbors to make sure there are no issues before we go out to bid. I think either Jeff or Kyle Hunt will be making a presentation. Jeff, I guess.
Just going to do a quick intro, and I'll be fast. The sidewalk program is a program that was started back in, well, we adopted the program in August of '07. And the goal was to make the city a more walkable community. So we've gone through several executions of this, and so it's becoming a little more routine for us to do this. We want to bring projects to you tonight for discussion, and like Mr. DeFebo said, we'll go to the neighborhoods as our next step. I'd like to thank Kyle Hunt, Kyle Bearden, and Melissa Kanzler, who worked hard to get this all together. Going through this evaluation criteria, we've automated some of those processes, and it's, like I said, we've developed some expertise in everything, and I'd like to thank those employees for their hard work with this. Melissa and I will be here. Kyle will do the presentation, and then any questions you have afterwards, we'll be glad to answer.
Thank you, Jeff, and good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. As Mr. DeFebo said, we're here this afternoon to present our candidate projects for the FY12 sidewalk construction program. And we presented back in April, I believe, of this year, the FY11 projects, and we'll follow pretty much a similar presentation, give a brief overview of the sidewalk policy itself, and then discuss each location. Again, the purpose of the sidewalk program is to improve pedestrian access throughout the city, definitely a BOC priority back in '07. As Jeff said, this policy was approved in August of '07, and since FY08, when the policy was adopted, we have constructed or are pending construction approximately 6.5 miles of sidewalk. So we've definitely made a dent in the overall list that we have. This was the design for these projects was completed through a combination of in-house and contracted efforts. With the first round of sidewalks in '08, there was several that were, the designs were contracted out to a local firm. However, after that, the subsequent designs have been performed exclusively in-house, and you can see the breakdown in percentages there. And then just as a side note, the budget for FY12 is $400,000, the same as last year, I believe. Now, the question may be, how do we select which sidewalks do we construct from year to year? And we do that through a criteria-based selection process. And there are 5 criteria that we look at, and I'll discuss those in just a moment. We use a higher scores better methodology, and this allows us to establish the order in which candidate projects are constructed, rather than us going out and subjectively picking locations that may or may not need construction. This gives us somewhat more of a structured approach. And then, again, this year, as well as last year, locations with a sidewalk on one side of the street already were not considered for the program. And here are the 5 criteria that we look at for each location. We look at connectivity. We call this the gap score. Does a particular location close a gap within the existing sidewalk network? Location of the project. We look at proximity to high pedestrian use areas such as schools, bus stops, or parks. Financial scoring is a part of it, and with a higher score given if a project may receive grant funding. Technical feasibility or ease of construction, we also look at that. Are there issues such as drainage, utilities, and the fewer of those issues that there are at a location, the higher score it gets. And then we also look at walkability. This takes into account safety for each location. Areas along an arterial or a collector roadway, such as Scottsville Road, would receive higher score than a location along a local street or a cul-de-sac. And then for any projects that have a tie score, the cost would be used as a tiebreaker with priority given to the less expensive option. And here are our 5 locations for FY12 construction. The first was Lehman Avenue from Eastwood to Wakefield. We have Collett Lane from Wakefield to Covington. Third was Steeplechase from Ironwood Drive to Lover's Lane. Fourth was Holly Drive from Morgantown Road to Catherine. And number 5 was Ogden Way from Chestnut Street to Cabell. And this makes up about 4,800 linear feet, so just under a mile of new sidewalk construction. And again, locations with no sidewalks at all were considered, so locations that already have sidewalk on one side were not included for scoring. We have a few exhibits to show you. The first is Lehman. Again, it's from Eastwood to Wakefield. And as you're going from Eastwood toward Wakefield, it would be on the left side of the road. And it crosses Nutwood and Covington and again ends at Wakefield. The second one is Collett. And of course, this one scored high with Potter Gray Elementary being right here. And again, it would close a gap, or help to close a gap with sidewalk along Covington. The next one was Steeplechase from Ironwood to Lover's Lane. And again, we would pick up along Ironwood where an existing sidewalk currently ends. And then again, it would tie into the state's sidewalk along Lover's Lane. Here is Ogden Way. And again, with the university being so close, and again, there's a gap here between Chestnut and Cabell that would be filled as well. And the last one is Holly Drive. Again, this, you may ask, this is a short section, so why did it rank so high? Again, you have Orange Central over here, and then Dishman McGinnis along Old Morgantown Road to the north. And then a project that we may look at in the future that would help tie this together is along Catherine. You can see the Catherine Drive and Dennis Way sidewalk, I believe, was completed in FY09. And then we would have our project here. And then any potential sidewalk along Catherine would help to connect that gap. You can see there. So, and then, would have any questions? If there are no objections to these locations, it would be our intent to coordinate with Karen Foley to conduct several public meetings for these locations to get input from the public. So, welcome any questions.
Bruce,
Go ahead. College Lane between Wakefield and Covington. I'd submit a request from the neighborhood out there about delineating the bike path. It looks as though you're going to put the sidewalk the opposite side of the bike path. Is there any consideration given to using that as a shared use path on the other side of the road?
We did look at that, and there were some technical feasibility concerns that we had. I know there's some large trees on the same side as the bike path. That's something that we could look at again.
We've kicked around a couple ideas on this. We could look at either side, and that's one thing when we go to the neighborhoods we will discuss further. But again, looking at keeping the path or the walkway, the bikeway on the right side is what we had considered at this point. I know we've had some concerns there with buses and everything and providing separation between the walking distance and children going to school, and you know, we're going to do everything we can to try to incorporate that in there. We're also looking, you know, your project you and I have been talking about some kind of delineation along the existing line there to help provide some buffer and just to notify the motorists that, hey, we got people walking over here. So we're trying to work out the best way, you know, and this is the 30,000 feet view down. There's a lot of details to be worked out carrying on from this point.
I understand. I just had that inquiry about that path.
Yeah.
Would they be confused if they had wide path on one side and the sidewalk on the other?
Right.
Where are they going to be and where the motor's going to
Exactly. And, you know, there would need to be some kind of signage, or, you know, if one side's designated bike or multi-use, we need to do some work on our side. We need to make sure the buses can make the radius. So there's a lot of details that we will be working out here in short order.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Walker,
Mine was the same question as Bruce's.
any other questions?
Only one. In preparation for this, these 5 scored well. How many places did y'all look at?
I think there are over, I think, close to 100 different
100.
locations that we had to go through and look at. Yeah, so almost 200 locations that we have to look at as far as technical feasibility and everything. So there are quite a few that, like Jeff said, we do have some expertise in it now, and it's more routine as successive FYs. So.
Any other? No further. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. City Manager.
The final item deals with the capital budget. I think you share with me that we come here to City Hall, all of us, whether elected or appointed, to represent the people's interest, to provide them services, and to make investments in our community. We do this through the budget process, and there are generally 2 parts of the budget. One is the general fund, which reflects heavily on services. The other is the capital improvement budget, which reflects the investments that we're making in the community or our own organizational infrastructure. For example, this Thursday at 9 o'clock, we are going to have the ribbon cutting for the old Morgantown Road. It had its birth in this capital improvement process, and so we can see how it starts with the budget process, and Thursday we get to cut that ribbon for something. Kate is going to lead in presenting a capital improvement budget, I believe, for the next 3 years, Kate? Yes. I give Kate.
Good afternoon. I'm going to try and make this brief. I'm just going to give a basic overview. What you have is a notebook that contains much more detail over the next few years, but our capital program is the fiscal year 2012, which we've already approved, through fiscal year 2015. Essentially, what makes up the capital improvement program are annual projects that look at public infrastructure and facilities, whether we need some new infrastructure or we need to update existing facilities. It's also projects that are $25,000 and over, generally with a life of 5+ years. Estimated project costs and sources of funding are included in the program, and then also any debt service that we've had already placed from capital projects is included in this. Essentially, what the program is going to do is provide us a place to look when we have to look to the future for projects. All these projects are essentially on the horizon, things that need to be done at some point, but may or may not need to be done in the years that we've projected at this time. Again, an overview over the total costs. One of the things we tried to do this year with our capital program is to take out from our totals the debt payments that are made by other entities, such as WKU. They pay the bond debt for the Diddle Arena project. And then Warren County also pays 50% of the debt on a depot renovation lease that we took out a few years back, as well as on the ITA bonds that came in 2009. So these figures are net of those additional payments that we receive. So fiscal year 2012, again, this has already been approved, $14.7 million. We're projecting for fiscal year 11, $22.8 million. I'll go into detail on that in just a second. Fiscal year 14, $13.8 million, and then fiscal year 15, $14.1 million. So we're looking at a total of $65.6 million if we did all of these projects at current estimated costs. Again, another breakdown, just identifying the different sources of funding. Certainly, most of our projects are funded out of the general fund, as well as quite a bit of our debt. But this is a breakdown of the general fund projects versus where we get special revenues. For instance, we have some special revenues for the fire department with the fire improvement fund that we have, which is insurance premium tax share. Police department has some special revenues depending on whether it's for the 911 communications center, or if it's related to some citation monies that they receive and able to spend on various police projects. We also are looking at financing 2 of our more larger projects in fiscal year 2013, which is what makes up that larger $22.8 million figure. Right now, debt is basically $9.5 million on average through these next 4 years. If we finance the projects in fiscal year 13, that would obviously add to our debt going forward. Just to follow up on the fiscal year 12 budget, again, this has already been approved, but following the approval of the budget in late June, we did apply for a grant for security fencing for the police department. That was about $160,000 that was added to our program. And that application, to my knowledge, is still pending approval? No? It looks like.
I noticed last week we did not get it.
Okay, well, that'll be coming off of the plan then, for the moment, or moving into a future project. We did have, as you approved back last month in October, the 2 roof projects for the annex and the operations building. For whatever reason, I'll call it error on my part, the entries in the capital program were what appeared to be maybe backwards in terms of the project totals. So we've adjusted those amounts to better reflect what our actual bids came in at for those projects. There is no change in the bottom line of the budget. And then also following the budget, we found that we've got some problems with our Public Works Administration building. The exterior of the building, when it rains, is seeping water in through the brick, and so we need to get that fixed. So some exterior work needs to be done on that building, and we've opted to postpone the interior improvements on the annex facility and do the interior and exterior improvements on the Public Works facility instead. They're about the same amount of cost, about $35,000. We will also, with that, add and continue to do the annex exterior project. We'll bid both the annex and the Public Works exterior projects together to hopefully get a better cost on the bid for that. Again, generally, it's not much of a change to the bottom line of the budget. And we'll do the annex interior improvements in fiscal year 13. Just showing a distribution of our funding. I wanted to give you an idea of what our operating costs are compared to our capital when you're looking at the total budget. Essentially, when you look at all funds or you're looking at general fund, it's about the same. About 18% of our budget is spent on capital projects, where 82% is spent on our normal operating costs. I wanted to also identify some past year comparisons so you can get an idea of where these numbers for our projected years fall in. You can see that in fiscal year 2007, we had a high mark of $31.7 million in all funds, including debt, for our capital projects, all the way down to a low in fiscal year 11 of $12.4 million. So you can kind of see that the forecasts that we've included for fiscal years 13, 14, and 15 are pretty much on average the same as what we've done in the past 5 years. Again, just looking at the general fund portion of our capital projects, and this does include debt that's paid by the general fund. We had a high mark in 2007 of $10.1 million. That year we used a lot of our, or quite a bit of our general fund reserve to fund some specific capital projects. And those were one-time cash payments that we made for many of those projects. And we had a low in fiscal year 10 of $5.8 million. But on average, we're looking at the $8.5 million compared to the next 4 years versus the last 5 years. This chart just breaks out the debt from what are our general capital projects. Again, this is just looking at the general fund, which is the primary portion of our budget that we want to be concerned about or consider. You'll note there are some asterisks next to some of these figures. What I've done is I've gone back to try and compare an apples to apples number forecast for you. I've gone back to those years and looked at those projects that we were able to use general fund monies. However, they were shown in a special revenue account because we had moved the money the year before as underspending, or we were able to set aside the money specifically for a project previously to the budget being approved for those years. So I did want to pull those out and show you how much money was actually spent from general fund for these projects. In fiscal year 10, we actually, that $237,000 was money that was already set aside in project funds. There was no new general fund used in that fiscal year for capital. And again, on average, our debt's about $5.9 million compared to what our average capital project program is about $2.4 million. Now looking at the out years again, the capital plan is for fiscal year 13. The two major priority projects we have, new projects, are the radio system replacement. That's a $5.5 million venture just for the city's portion of that project. And then Small House Cave Mill realignment. Right now the figure I have for that is $2.8 million for construction. However, that may have changed. The figure I have is at least a year, maybe a year old, so that might need to be updated. And then again, we're continuing our stormwater and sidewalk programs. And we want to bring back some equipment replacement that we've deferred for the last few years. We've got some heavy equipment in operations division as well as our police vehicles for patrol that we need to replace. And then essentially the rest of the budget is just looking at existing facilities, updating current infrastructure, doing basic maintenance and improvements to those. And that continues for the most part in fiscal years 14 and 15. Again, looking at those out years, I'm looking at this capital improvement program as I've had it put together at this point as a maintenance-based multi-year plan. We're not really adding any new projects. Those can certainly come. All the projects that we have in each of the individual years would be re-looked at each of those years, reevaluated, prioritized based on the amount of resources we have to fund projects in that particular year as we're putting the budget together, would ultimately decide what projects move forward and what projects may be pushed out to future years. The equipment replacement also would be scrutinized. We would continue to defer any replacements that we can. We'll look at the maintenance history, we'll look at mileage, age, and operational safety of that equipment before we'll replace actual pieces of equipment. And again, each year the Board of Commissioners does a strategic planning, and from that strategic planning there could be new priorities, new projects that are added to future capital program. Are there any questions? Department, there are individuals here from some of the departments if you have specific questions about any of the projects.
Any questions? No questions?
Okay. Thank you.
It must mean y'all have done a good job.
What the plan will be is to bring this forward at our next meeting for actual consideration for the board to approve the plan, and at that point you can certainly make any adjustments or changes to it as well.
Mr. City Manager?
I want to thank Kate and the senior managers and department heads for all their work in putting this together, and for the employee groups who participated and helped us to focus on top priorities, and of course your input from the strategic planning process. As you can see by the themes Kate mentioned, we have had to basically adhere to the policy we can only spend what we have. And so we've adopted that in practice and have focused heavily on our priorities. Those always being first public safety, followed by roads, I think. We continue to make our commitment, as you can see, to your past priorities of stormwater and sidewalks. So those are kind of like the big four. We have deferred equipment for many, many years, partly because our staff does a good job of maintaining it. And so we're at the, I think at the point where we're going to need to invest in, especially in some public works equipment. And our continuing, as you can see from the budget, IT requires continual investment to keep us on the cutting edge of technology to help us be more efficient. in what we do. So.
Any other? No further, meeting adjourned.